I've been preaching relatively low volume for literally years. And every time I do a video doing so, somebody always pipes up saying, but Jeff Nippard, Mike Israel, they both say higher volume is better for you, and they have the educations, and therefore must know more than you. How times have changed. Jeff Nippard, less work, more gains, 100-day experiment. And guess what? It aligns with what I believe. I digress, because I'm getting a bit knobby about this. I'm going to talk about this video. We're going to listen. We're going to learn some things. I'm going to give my opinion, alter a few things, and present my conclusion regarding whether you should do high or low volume. And you probably already know the answer, but let me explain and tickle this moment for a bit longer. Like with all my videos, if at any point you actually just like anything I'm saying or even disagree with it, I would really appreciate it if you did like the channel and also subscribe to the channel because it makes me less sad.
For as long as I've been training, I've always been a pretty high volume guy. For one, that's the way the bodybuilding greats like Arnold, Ronnie Coleman, and Jay Cutler all trained, and it's also what the science suggested was most optimal.
One thing I do want to note is a lot of the kind of we've seen it work in the past, therefore it must work now mentality comes from essentially anecdotal early gear use era. What I mean from that is a lot of the kind of earlier greats of bodybuilding would train a certain way and people say, well, Ronnie does it, it must be pretty good. Things are a bit different when you're heavily enhanced and you're also a genetic phenom to the point where you could literally fart and grow muscle. So you can't necessarily apply that logic to like the average gym goer. Sure, we can learn some things there, but it shouldn't be like a be all and end all of argument ender. Arnie did it, it must be right. Ronnie did it, it must be right.
The thing is, on paper, by following this plan, I was training at a level of volume that most experts would say is too low to maximize muscle growth.
I think people are really overlooking the importance of frequency in this equation. So obviously, Jeff is training everything twice a week and some things even 3 times a week being his arms. Makes sense when you consider opportunities to grow. If you train something once a week, you have 52 opportunities to grow a year. Train something 2 or 3 times a week, those opportunities obviously increase. And I think opportunities of growth is pretty bloody important. My clients will attest to this. I don't think I have any client doing more than 12 sets per muscle group per week, and very few are doing less than 4 sets. It depends on the muscle group, it depends on the client and their goals. But my green zone has always been 4 to 10, 4 to 12 sets per muscle group per week, split over at least twice a week if possible, but sometimes even 3 if it's an area of priority, we'll say.
Last year, Pelland and colleagues dropped the biggest, most detailed meta-analysis on training volume that's ever been published by far. Now we're up from 15 to, get this, 35 studies on training volume for muscle growth. And this time, they found another super clear dose-response relationship between volume and hypertrophy.
Is this growth or perceived growth a product of inflammation or swelling? When you do more volume, you are going to cause a lot of inflammation and localized swelling. Therefore, it can make things appear or maybe read as slightly more hypertrophy beneficial than other things because, again, you're inflamed and you're swollen. Second thing to note, a lot of these studies are short term. They're done over a period of 8, 16 weeks perhaps. And reality is this, I think some of them are actually done over 6 to 8 weeks. How much progress do you really expect to see in such a short period of time? But secondly, one thing you need to consider is long-term progression. Could high volume potentially yield better results in a short term? Yeah, maybe, potentially actually. But what about long term? What about recovery? If high volume hinders your ability to recover, therefore hinders your ability to experience long-term growth, over 6 to 8 weeks, high volume may be superior, but over 52 weeks, perhaps low volume could be superior because, again, you don't have to deload, less chance of injuries, the recovery hasn't been impacted, you could train things a bit more consistently, more frequently, and progressively overload more frequently. All of these variables matter. Imagine if somebody says to you, okay, you can gain 15 pounds for the first 3 months of your training, but the next 9 months you're only going to gain 5 pounds total, so 20 pounds over a year, or you can progressively gain 30 pounds relatively equally over the course of a year. I'd rather choose the option that gives me more muscle, even if it means the gains won't be as rapid as early on. Link down below in the description, and maybe even the comment section too, is a link to the tfnl coaching application form. If you're interested in working with me on a one-to-one basis where I can help coach you towards your goals, whatever they may be, and wherever you may be in the world, click the link down below, fill in the application, which takes literally 2 minutes. I'll send you an email with a bit more information, and then we can hop on a free Zoom consultation call when I can explain to you what online coaching is, I can answer any questions you may have, and give you a much more detailed rundown of what coaching actually consists of. And again, like I said, as always, there's a link down below in the comment section and also in the description too.
These studies didn't apply high volumes to every muscle all at once. No, most of them just blasted their biceps and triceps or their quads with high volumes. And for the most part, all their other muscles were trained normally or not at all.
Isn't this just an element of prioritizing muscle groups? Ultimately, when you have a muscle group that you wish to grow faster or put more emphasis on, you're training more frequently, you're training it earlier in the week, and you're training it early in the session because you're less fatigued and therefore provide more output and are in the most recovered or optimal state for encouraging stimulus for growth. It's kind of what we're doing here is we're just focusing on one area and shocked that suddenly it grows exponentially when in reality you were just putting all of your eggs in that basket. I think it's probably going to be a bit different if the programming was maybe a little bit more evenly distributed, we'll say.
For the challenge, I wrote the most effective low volume split I could think of. Upper, lower, rest, upper, lower, arms and delts, rest. In just 1 to 2 sets per exercise, with almost every set taken to failure. I knew from other research that if I was going low on volume, I needed to go ultra high on intensity.
I mean, isn't this what I've been saying for a lifetime? Ultimately, intensity is key. And the reason why I say that is we know there are a certain number of effective reps per set. If let's say that number is 5, so a set to failure accumulates 5 effective reps, which are going to be 5 reps that basically encourage sufficient stimulus for growth. To get the same stimulus from growth doing half-assed intensity, you're going to need more volume. So sure, you can do a high volume approach in which you take everything to 4 reps in reserve. You're only getting 1 stimulating rep, therefore to accumulate 5, you need 5 sets of a movement. Or you could just work harder for less and take 1 set to failure, accumulating 5 effective reps in that singular set. And then someone's going to argue, well, what if you do high volume and high intensity? Diminishing returns. And beyond that, you're probably going to end up hurting yourself eventually, and I'd rather not hurt myself because hurting myself, shockingly, get ready for it, actually hurts. I don't like that. Don't like the hurting.
The research does show, for the most part, that on average, higher volume training does lead to more muscle growth. However, I do think on a cut, a low volume program can make more sense, and that's because you have a lower recovery capacity. And so a high volume training program can just be harder to recover from.
This is kind of something I've said for a long time in the sense that if you're in a depleted state, so you're in a deficit, do less. Everyone says, oh, I'm going to change my training when I'm in a deficit. You don't need to. The only thing that should really change in your training when in a deficit is potentially your volume. Do less. Firstly, it's a lot easier to maintain muscle than it is to build muscle. Jeff actually highlights this later on in the video where he said muscle was maintained doing 3 sets once a week. But also, as he mentioned, you have less food in your system, less fuel, less recovery capabilities. Therefore, you may not be able to recover as well. And then to optimize performance, you're probably going to need to do less. Again, ultimately, it really depends what you can recover from. That being said, you can also grow in a deficit. A lot of people may not believe this, but shockingly, you can actually build muscle when in a deficit state. Provided you're progressively overloading, that's going to be a pretty good indicator of you doing so. Less fuel, keep volume as is, unless recovery starts getting hindered, then maybe reduce your volume accordingly. But provided you're still in like that green zone of weekly volume and you're training everything, ideally twice a week minimum, and still push yourself hard, you're probably going to be okay, even in a deficit. Just don't bath your recovery trying to cling onto something you really don't need to try that hard to cling onto.
Despite being about 7 pounds lighter in the after, I think I held on to my muscle fullness, size, and density really well. And my DEXA supports that too. From day 1 to day 100, I lost 5.5 pounds of fat mass and 1.8 pounds of lean mass. I think that's a really solid ratio, especially when you consider that lean mass isn't only muscle mass. It also includes any water that I lost during the cut.
To be honest with you, I wouldn't deep DEXA scans too much. I mean, years ago, Blogilates did her 90-day challenge, and I believe on average, her DEXA scan was indicating that she was gaining more muscle per month on average than Ronnie Coleman was, who's arguably the best bodybuilder of all time. Think about it, Blogilates, Ronnie Coleman. That being said, sure, they can be an indicator of sorts by typically trying to avoid relying on them for too much data, because again, there are so many variables, and like Jeff even said, lean mass is even considered water. How much of that mass is water versus muscle is really hard to tell, so it's kind of an inaccurate data point or variable to really consider.
If you've been following me for a while, you might remember that I used to say that your training volume shouldn't change just because you start cutting. How do training requirements change when you go from a caloric surplus to a caloric deficit? And I think the answer is actually quite simple. It doesn't. But after doing this challenge, I want to update that. If you're cutting, I think low volume is the way to go. High volume will still work, but I don't think it's ideal since your recovery is lower in a deficit and low volumes retain muscle just fine as long as you're training hard. If you're bulking, I honestly think the best approach might be to keep your volume relatively low for every muscle except one. Blast one muscle with 10 to 20, maybe even 30 sets per week at a time. And then every few months, you can rotate which muscle you're blasting. I think this makes a lot of sense, especially as you get more advanced.
I mean, I guess that is a valid approach. In conclusion, my thoughts are this. Low volume is king. Low doesn't mean low. Low is kind of more like low to moderate, anywhere from, like I said, 4 to 12 sets per week per muscle group. But ultimately, if you have a priority muscle group, what you should do is this. Train your priority muscle group as early in the week as you can. So for example, make sure you hit it on your first session, then split that accordingly throughout the week. Make sure you train it as early in your workout as possible, i.e. your first exercise and not your last. And make sure you train it ideally to probably even 3 times per week, accumulating maybe the higher end of the volume green zone. So rather than doing like 4 to 8 sets per week, maybe do 8 to 12. Just make sure whatever you're doing it bloody hard, because intensity is key. And no, you don't need to take everything to failure if you don't want to. Anywhere from 0 to 2 reps in reserve is going to be okay. Yes, failure may link to more stimulus for growth, but there's a trade-off there of recovery capabilities. So it really depends how you recover and what you can recover from. And it also depends on how much volume you are actually doing, as that will influence recovery as well. And also whether you're in a deficit too. So that's it. That is my conclusion, which is essentially, for lack of a better term, I kind of told you so. And oftentimes people do discredit other individuals because maybe their channels aren't quite as big, or perhaps they lack the educational background. But with the recent drama surrounding Mike Israetel, we know that credentials may not be everything. I've said this for a long time. I'll continue to say it again for a long time, not just based on the research I've read, but also what I've experienced in myself, and also what I've experienced in the hundreds of clients I've now worked with. Is there one size that fits all? No. Individuality is a thing to consider and something many people do overlook, but ultimately this is just my preferred way of training. You may not agree with it. In fact, you actually may disagree with it, and that's absolutely fine. Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. Until the next one, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my volume about waffle, and thank you for tolerating the video.